After 2 abbreviated work weeks, do we have any real sense of the legislative session now underway? Highways. Will the General Assembly kick the can down the road, and will the voters kick up their heels? Tax cuts seem a certainty, but what does that mean for social spending? And the loyal opposition. With both chambers deeply red, how much room for blue? Arkansas Week coming up.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. The General Assembly begins its 3rd week in session come Monday. First 2 weeks, per usual, have been largely ceremonial, some action taken, but not a great deal. So at the 2-week mark, we'll take a pause and see if we can't get some sort of sense of where this session is headed. Joining us, State Senator Joyce Elliott, Democrat of Little Rock, Representative Charles Blake, Democrat of Little Rock, Representative Jim Sorvillo of Little Rock, and Representative Carlton Wing, Republican of North Little Rock, should I say Argenta, Mr. Wing?
You could. We've also been known as Dogtown. We are proud Dogtown.
No, Dogtown's out. No,
There's a great history there.
Yeah, more any of that. But do we have, as I mentioned, it is the opening days tend to be, Ms. Elliott, Senator, they tend to be a bit casual. The heavy lifting is still to be done.
Oh yeah, because we have some ceremonial things, and we have the flurry of bills that are being introduced, and we know some of them that are introduced, ones that are going to create news. We also know some others that are in the hopper that are not even out there yet are going to create news. But largely, we have several new people there, and they're trying to learn where all the doors are and figure out how the process works. But we're in that phase right now. But I do think probably even starting next week, we will see things really begin to tick up quite a bit.
Carlton Wing, your party's in the majority in both chambers. You're in control?
We've got the keys. I think the important...
Well, there's the second floor to consider as well.
That's true, yeah. But that kind of emphasizes the need for us all to work together. And I think that's a very important part of all that happens here. And as we're kind of in that crawl, walk, run phase, so we've started with the crawl, and we're probably going to start walking a little bit here, and then we'll be sprinting before too long. But it's important that we emphasize the communication ability, that we get the facts out on all of the issues that come out. I think communication is going to be one of the key issues in this session.
Jim Sorvillo, what's the issue in your mind?
Well, I think...
Or is there one overriding?
Well, highways and our tax cut, I think those two will be a lot of conversation, and hopefully we'll see a measure that comes out that'll be effective for the constituents that we serve.
Charles Blake.
Our priorities are going to be our priorities. I think Carlton Wing said it the best when he said getting the message out. What we have done and what we've continued to do from the 91st to the 92nd is making sure we have the families of Arkansas top of mind. And that if that's an earned income tax credit, if that's making sure we're fully funding our medical school here, if that's making sure that we're fixing the Medicaid system that we have now. Those are our priorities, and those are the things that we're going to make sure that we drive our message to those people we all represent.
Well, that brings us to you brought it up, EITC, and we're into tax policy now. Obviously, it seems a given that Arkansans, maybe all, maybe just most, but the administration insists it wants all held harmless at a minimum on tax policy. EITC is an idea that has been tried before, sometimes offered even by Republican members in previous administrations. It doesn't seem to have a whole lot of traction with Mr. Wing's caucus and Mr. Sorvillo's caucus. How far can you take it?
This is the third or
Earned
fourth
income tax credit.
earned income tax credit. It's the third or fourth session that we have brought this up. Actually, this was a idea of a Republican president. Reagan said that this is the number one thing that will lift people from poverty. And so we are serious about making sure that we're putting more money into those working families' pockets, and which in turn put more money into local economies. So if we have an opportunity to put the earned income tax credit next side by side with whatever tax cut that the second floor is bringing, that the governor is bringing, then I think Arkansans will see those side by side and say which one helps me the best. And we can't have a tax cut that is going to be on the burdens of the working class of our Arkansans. So that's one of our biggest priorities in making sure people see what the contrast in these two are.
Yeah, Senator Elliott?
I served on the task force, the tax study, and one of the things we brought up was that I brought up and Senator Ingram was the earned income tax credit, because we thought if we were going to have all these other tax credits, and keep in mind we're overhauling the whole structure, and thought this would be a place we could have the earned income tax credit. And we got the impact statement to see what it would cost, and then it was basically determined probably that we could not get it out of that committee, and the cost was going to be so much that people would not want to pay for it, or that the legislature would not want to pay for it, which I think is very unfortunate, because if we're going to figure out a way to pay for $180 million, that's that tells us something that we're willing to do. We tend to do what we're willing to do, what we want to do. And so then another discussion came about, and I think something we might look at when we get to introducing it. Where do we find that money? And if we have, a tax increase on things like vaping and some of the maybe some other possibilities, nevertheless, it is about your priorities. And we ran into an issue of there were some people with the earned income tax credit thought they would not be eligible and they should be getting something else. But I think we've seen over the years in many of our states that that's something that has worked to really help people.
Yeah, gentlemen, your conference would seem to be driving. Well, the governor always gets the last word on tax policy, and he hasn't looked too favorably about, or hasn't signaled any desire at all to lean the EITC way. It's going to be tax cuts, income tax cuts.
If I could add, I'm doing some research on the federal income tax credit and the percentage of Arkansans that are taking advantage of that. I would like to see, based on what those actual numbers are, that we provide opportunity for them to understand how they would be able to qualify. And so I think that's real important, and communications in our business is very important. And the other thing I would want to say about the tax credit, or not the tax credit, the tax cuts, is that the governor has two tax cuts. One was $100 million for the middle income. The second one was for the low income. So we have passed those tax cuts for the majority of Arkansans. The thing about the new tax cut at the level that the governor's talking about that really I think resonates with me is that when you go above that $75,000, basically we're talking about a lot of small business owners, and it's what we call pass-through income, so that even though they get a tax credit or a tax reduction, that money doesn't always go into their pocket. Hopefully those small businesses are reinvesting it into their business, creating more jobs. And so I think that will help drive the economy in Arkansas.
But does it necessarily, though, Mr. No. Does that money necessarily go back into the business?
But it's proven that the earned income tax credit does, so, and that's what we're talking about, trying to have the opportunity to that maybe the small business owner will put more money will pay their people more, or put more money in the local economy. The earned income tax credit absolutely does that. It puts more money into those families who are working into their pockets, which in turn they have an opportunity now to spend money into local economy. So that's been proven. So I like to stay on I guess proven facts.
Yeah.
So.
Mr. Wayne.
I think EITC has a place in the narrative, but we have to keep in mind the overall tax structure and the plan. It needs to be complementary to the overall. You can't have competing forces that can offset. And so I think that's where the governor's tax plan, he's providing a very holistic view of an entire tax structure. And so if EITC has a place in it, then great. But there might be other offsets within that can provide the necessary. What we're trying to do is make Arkansas competitive again with a tax structure that's going to bring businesses and bring sustainable families right here to our state.
You're persuaded then the tax policy is a driver in terms of economic development.
Yeah, because if we ignore that, it's not only not a driver, it's a repellent to growth in the state of Arkansas. We're seeing that businesses, when they have a choice between Arkansas and other states, a lot of times they're choosing other states simply because of this tax policy.
Just because of it?
That's not the only reason, but that's a major factor. It's a major
Right.
factor. We lost a bid last week just because of the tax policy.
Yeah.
No, well, yeah, because the research is just not on the side of that belief over all the years, because we have, from the federal all the way down to the state level, we've forever heard that tax cuts will drive the economy. We started that pretty much with Reagan in the 80s, and that just has not been borne out. What businesses will tell you over and over, we'll take a tax break, and in the South we have gotten used to competing with each other to spend the most we can to get a business. But what they tell you, there are three things, and it is not tax breaks. I got something just yesterday from the Heartland Institute of all people, and these are not my people, who were telling us how tax credits and these big tax breaks are not, don't work necessarily unless it's something like where you're putting it back in the economy. So what they will tell you is that, number one, education is huge. That's why we ought to be putting more money in pre-K and everything else.
And paying teachers.
And making sure that we are, using it right. But the second thing I would tell you is infrastructure, like our highways, that's big. And the third thing is quality of life. If this were the case, there would not be businesses, locating in some of these states that have high tax structure. But they do. Why are businesses in Minnesota? Why are businesses in Connecticut, even New York, for that matter? But if Texas continues to give away the store, a lot of businesses are located there. I don't blame the businesses. It's up to us to have policy that makes sense for all of our people, and that's where our tax policy is not comprehensive. It does not think in terms of all of our people and how can we raise up everybody, because I can promise you, the tax cuts we got are not enough to raise up people in the middle income and the lower income. If we had used that same money in an aggregate fashion, how much money could we have put in the highways where everybody uses the highways? How much money could we have put into universal, if people wanted it, pre-K, because anybody could take advantage of it? How much money could we have put into helping our senior citizens, because everybody could take advantage?
That's the other case. There is some
There is the other case.
Sorry, gentlemen, yeah, I'll go back to that.
So can we bring into the conversation the sales tax in the state of Arkansas and state here? I mean, when you look at Tennessee, that is just, we're second with the highest sales tax in the nation, and Tennessee is only, I think, 1/4% higher, but they have no income tax. Who makes the decision to come to a state? And that is basically the executive board. They are high earners. It affects them personally. So I think that we have to understand that there is a benefit, but you can't add, what, 16.5%? Is that where we are, 16.5%? With the sales tax and the income tax? That's a burden to the people.
One thing, just to close out, it's good. The conversation we're having is good because
just close it out, yeah.
Well, and that's right. We'll keep going. But
Go ahead.
no. The EITC we talked about has its roots in Reagan. Reagan's tax cuts had its roots with Kennedy. Democrats and Republicans all have come up with good ideas, and when we have an opportunity to share these ideas together, that's one of the things I really love about the state of Arkansas and our legislature, is that we might have different ideas, but we have different ideas on how to get to the same place. And that's one thing. Our legislature, we were voted the least partisan legislature in the country not too long ago. That's a good thing about this.
Let me shift the focus just slightly. There is, as I mentioned, some pushback on the notion of tax cuts, period, whether it's personal, corporate, EITC, any kind of tax reduction, on the theory that we have too many, as Ms. Elliott was talking about a second ago, we are not, it is argued, we're not making the investments we need in, for example, higher education has been static, funding has been stationary actually for decades. K-12, pre-K, and Health and Human Services. Your response, Carlton, this way.
You know, when you look at where we are from a tax rate and what our citizens are paying for their state government, we are high. We are high in the region, we are high nationally. And so then you look at, okay, well, what are we getting in return for that? Are we getting the goods and services? Are we ranked #1 in education? Are we ranked #1 in transportation? The answer is no. And so we're probably not getting the return on the investment. Well, in fact, we're not getting the return on investment for our tax dollars, and that's why we've got to do some transformation. Dare I bring up that word, but that we've got to do some transformation in government to be able to meet the needs of the citizens for that we are getting what we are paying for with our tax dollars.
Transform how, sir?
Transforming government, a holistic, and that's what the governor has been. I use that word a lot, but we're looking at everything, going from the 42 agencies down to 15, but be able to re-look at how we are managing the affairs of the people. Lieutenant Governor Griffin brought out a point long time ago, as if we were going to create government right now, starting at point zero right now, would we create what we have right now?
Let's hope
Probably not.
Well, and I think the thing that I would look at is look at our budget. Okay, we're going to have about a 5.6 general fund. Our special income or special funding is about 6.1, and then you throw in Medicaid. We have about 18 and maybe $21.5 million, with $9 million being Medicare. So the point, you have special incomes coming, yet during the task force, we didn't cut exemptions. We didn't cut, you know, and so it's a fact that if you're not going to willing to cut certain things, you're not going to end up having the outcome you want.
Mr. Blake?
You go ahead, because I'm chomping at the bits here, so go ahead.
Well, when we go ahead,
Defer, yeah. I like it. Go ahead, defer. Two things about the tax cut that, you know, based on our last conversation. Number one, the people who make considerably more money, we can say their tax rate is whatever it is, but by the time they take all their deductions and take advantage of everything that's in the system, it really is not, and that's even true of businesses. It really is not. They're not paying that rate. Actually, that's what it is.
It's not an effective rate, though.
It is.
It never has been.
It never has been.
Never has
But we leave it out there kind of as people are actually paying, and they really aren't. So, but keep in mind though, the people who are at the lower end don't have advantage of all those deductions because they make too little money. So what they get is what they get, basically. And then lastly, I think this idea of transformation is actually right on. I agree with Carlton about that. But the thing we need to do to have a real impact on Arkansas is never decided, what do we want to be? Do we want to be the state that has one of the best quality of life ratings, you know, let's just say in the South? Do we want to be the state that has the best education? And do we want to be the state where people have some leisure time and have time to work with their families? We ought to be thinking about what we want to be. That is what should drive the way we use our taxes. But we've never done that. And if we don't ever decide what we want to be, we keep pulling a little here and a little there, and that's why it's not comprehensive and it's not coherent. We're just doing things. And you look at other countries where, even a lot of times in other states, they've decided what they want to be, and then they use their resources to fund that, and then it treats everybody in a much more equitable fashion.
Let me shift it if I can for just a second. If you put it to a vote, do we need better highways? It would be 100 in the House, 35 in the Senate. But how to get there? Yeah. Is there any consensus evolving early in the session thus far on how to do it, other than perhaps special election or to kick the issue to a November ballot?
No.
It's going to be referred to the people.
I don't see a consensus forming, no. I know there are a lot of people who want to allow the voters to choose.
Yeah.
My concern with that is A, if we send it to the voters, we send it with an implicit endorsement that we think this is a good idea. I'm uncomfortable with that because I think a tax hike should be the absolute last option that we pursue to pay for the highways. The other concern is if we refer it to the voters, it gets on the ballot in 2020. We're at the early part of 2019 right now. If it fails, which most polls show that it would fail, now we're 2 years down the road with no plan whatsoever. So we need to have a strong plan B, and I'd like to actually pursue.
Let me stay with Mr. Wing if I can, Jim, for just a second. Where would you get the money?
That's what we're paid to do.
Well, I mean, you're talking about general revenues.
General revenue is just going to be going to have to be in the discussion to see about how that, because it seems like we keep coming up with the same problem and we don't have the right answer.
Jim Smith.
Yeah, the fact is, you have two issues. It's a consumption tax. So what you have with the fuel economy vehicles, and even looking at electric cars, we are consuming less. We're still driving as many miles as we possibly, and even more. The fact is, if we don't do it in the legislature, we're going to pay 25% more to put a bond issues out there so that people can vote on it. We got to be stewards of the people.
General revenues. Mr. Blake.
We have said over and over we can't reallocate funding that goes to our priorities. If education is our priority, then we have to make sure that money stays in that bucket for education. But what we can't do is lead with a tax cut that's going to take $128 million out of our general revenues and then at the same time say we can't find funding for highways. So that's it has to we have to look at it, as Carson said, with a holistic view and say we have to be, if our rural cities and our rural towns need roads paved, then we have to be serious about making sure that dedicating some funding that goes directly to highway funding.
Yeah. Senator?
Well, I think one of the things that people tend to want to put out there is that we'll have to take money out of the present general revenues. And I think that would be very irresponsible because there are so many things we're not funding right now. Mm-hmm. Just to think about, because this will come from discretionary funds, like funds that will go to higher ed. And a lot of people think we're spending too much money on higher ed, and I will remind people that we rank number 48 or 49th, whichever day it is, in the number of people who have some degree of some kind, and we really need that. So I think we really have to get ourselves to rethinking the priorities. I don't know what that's going to mean now in terms of money because we haven't decided what is most important. For example, with our tax break and all the things we want to do to entice businesses to come to our state, suppose knowing if we would accept the evidence that highways, that infrastructure is a major issue, wouldn't we be better off, for example, I'm not against a tax break, I'm not anti-business going to tax break, but what if we said that's one of the major things, why about let's put this money into those things that will attract businesses, not so much on the back end because we have not done all the things that we should do, invest in those top three, then we'll give you $50 million to come here. I think we're just doing it wrong because we've not sat down and thought about using the money quite differently.
Let me pause for a moment, if I may, to express the network's appreciation once again to the Arkansas Department of Education for the use of the Archford Education Building's studio. We're down in the basement, just in the shadow of the state capitol, and with that, again, thanks to the Education Department. But let me go here. We have more or less inadvertently assembled an urban coalition here.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people are surprised when they visit the General Assembly for the first time or infrequently at the level of collegiality. It is still quite high. But if the divide is not necessarily partisan, there has been growing concern over the years of and it's been an issue for a long time, and a rural-urban divide. That would, given the population to the demographic trends across Arkansas, but particularly in the Delta and in the southern part of the state and in the northern counties, you see this intensifying or aggravating itself. Sure. Mr. Wayne, we'll start with you.
You know, that's one of the things that is surprising to most people is they think it's Democrats versus Republicans. No, oftentimes it's urban versus rural. We even had a bill last time. It was congressional district against congressional district. We all banded together on that one. And but you know that we have to recognize the responsibility we have while we do and are elected by our constituents in our areas. The laws we make affect the entire state, and what is good for the state is typically good for all of us. And we've got to take that approach that we are all Arkansans.
Yeah. Mr. Blake?
Representative Wing is absolutely right. You know, I have the pleasure of having a district that is downtown Little Rock as well as southeast Pulaski County, Wrightsville, Woodson, Hensley. So that is a rural area, even though it's five minutes from the state capitol. It's there is a vast difference between services that happens in our cities and in rural southeast Pulaski County. So we have to have that. We have to make sure that we're at top of mind is all Arkansans and Arkansas families.
Delivering services, though, and just seconds remaining, delivering those services, is it not, is going to get more and more and more expensive.
Yeah, it will be. It will get more expensive.
To the less populated parts.
That's right, and I think that's something we need to keep at top of mind because most of our state actually is rural. And I mean, I grew up in Willisville, Arkansas, a class of 9 people in my graduating class. So
what's your valedictorian?
Everybody's in the top 10. So that's something I think people they look at somebody like me and think I'm an urban person. You know, I live in an urban area now, but I think all of us care very, very much about rural Arkansas, and it's in our education policies, for example, we try to make up for that because we know delivering education in rural areas is going to be difficult. We just this year, the legislature has created a legislative arts caucus because we know, and Carlton is a part of it, and Charles is in it, and you're welcome because we invite all legislators because it has great economic potential for our rural areas.
And I've got to end it there because we are simply out of time. Thanks to everybody for coming in. Madam, gentlemen, thank you, and thank you for watching. As always, see you next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.